Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Brew Hoop podcast. I'm Adam Paris, co-managing editor of brewhoop.com, and joining me on the other line, as per usual, are my fellow Brew Hoop brethren, Kyle Carr and Riley Feldman. Fellas, how are you doing after a big weekend of Bucks news?
Not just Bucks news, Adam, but the MLS season started this weekend. So from here
Yeah.
on out, we're gonna have we're gonna have an MLS section. So everybody get raring and ready to go for that.
I was going to say, Minnesota United off to a strong start. They still can't defend that well on set pieces, but they won on the road, which is a miracle for them. And also, we survived the road trip. So, bravo to us.
This is the point at which we do the bait and switch and reveal that this is no longer a basketball podcast, but in fact a soccer podcast under the Brew Hoop banner.
We've now that we have the subscribers in, we're gonna take advantage of that. Okay, I have a question for you, Kyle. Is the Madison forward thing with the Flamingos, are they MLS or what are they when they
No,
start?
so they are USL League One. So there's MLS, which is like the top tier.
Okay.
And then there's the USL, which is United States League or something like that. And they're and they have like three different tiers. So kind of like European based. So there's like the USL Championship, then there's USL League One and USL League Two. So Forward Madison's going to be in the USL League One. So they're more of a Division 3 tier program. So that's where they are. If there ever is promotion and relegation in the United States, it would pretty much go MLS, then USL Championship, then USL League One, USL League Two. So kind of a short but sweet version of where Forward Madison is. And there actually is a team in Green Bay also owned by the same group that owns Forward Madison, and they're in USL League Two.
What's the Green Bay team's mascot?
I don't know what theirs is, but their team name is the Voyagers.
Voyagers. Okay.
So it's just some big burly looking like lumberjack guy, I'm gonna assume.
Give or take, probably.
Yeah, we can bet on that. Well, apologies to every listener. I'm sorry I asked, but thank you for that helpful information, Kyle. I feel like
trust me, I can go all day about Forward Madison. Don't you worry.
Next podcast.
Yeah, that'll be the next pod. Or tune in when we do a Tuesday show, which is just Riley and Kyle just talking MLS stuff for 3 hours. All right, well, guys, let's get right to it because huge bit of news dropped on Friday, and that, of course, is that really huge shifting news. Basically, here that Pau Gasol will sign with the Bucks after a buyout from the Spurs. Now, we'll talk about that later, but of course, we have to talk about Eric Bledsoe getting paid a 4-year, $70 million contract. Kind of dropped out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting it at all. I don't think any Bucks fan can say they were expecting it. Came on Friday. Riley, you hear this news come across. Adrian Wojnarowski tweets it. First thoughts going through your head.
The first thing was just how crazy of a day it was because we had gone into it earlier in the morning because I believe and this is how it worked with Gasol as well, but we were I was keeping an eye out for any sort of buyout guys because anybody who was bought out on March 1st could still sign with somebody else that day and be eligible to be on the playoff roster. So when the Gasol news hit, I was like, okay, wow, that's really gigantic news. And I figured that was going to be the extent of it. And then, like you said, that Bledsoe news comes kind of out of nowhere. And it's just excitement. I mean, I think it's a good sign that Horst is proactively working with what we can assume is a strategy to retain the core and to not have to leave it up to chance or leave it up to a later on timeline where there's a lot of different moving parts. The fact that you're able to nail down a guy like Bledsoe, who should be a critical piece for the next 2, 3, 4 seasons, however long he's able to hold up. I think that bodes well for just the way that this summer should go, and it reduces the amount of volatility, which is always a plus.
Yeah, and Kyle, okay, so you see the news. What's the first reactions from you on your end?
Well, kind of like what Riley's saying. It was like all the buyouts, because first it was rumored that Marcin Gortat was a potential person, and I was like, okay, cool. He's a big body. That will work for someone, Brook Lopez insurance. Then it was, okay, they're going to sign Pau Gasol, and I was like, okay, have no complaints about that. He can bring a veteran presence and, again, be a big body in case Lopez were, for some reason, to get hurt. And then it was kind of nice that seeing that news with Bledsoe, I kind of had to do a double take because I wanted to double check the timestamp first just to be like, okay, this isn't an old tweet that someone's trying to troll me on. And then I double checked that it was actually Woj. I wasn't believing it at first because I didn't even realize you could like extend players like at this point of the season. I figured it was just one of those where you kind of try and do it before the season or like in October, and then once November comes around, you kind of just sit there and wait until the summer. So the fact that they were able to do it was a positive thing. And then just seeing the amount was even better because, you know, it was under his cap hold. It was a 4-year deal. It sounds like that 4th year might not even be fully guaranteed, which is very helpful also. So it's kind of the nice little combo of it was a team friendly deal, I think. And, you know, you get one less thing that you have to worry about in the summer. Like now you don't have to worry about Bledsoe. And I mean, I think he deserved the contract based off of how he's playing. Now the only hope is he continues that level of play throughout the playoffs and the next couple of years. But I think it was one of those where it doesn't hurt to get that locked in. And at the rates that were agreed to, it seems like it's a win-win for everyone. Bledsoe gets his paycheck, his last big paycheck. Horst is able to save a couple $1 million, and he doesn't have to worry. That's one less player he has to try and negotiate with over the summer. And I think it's also a sign that when you're winning, things can go well and you can make these kind of moves where you can kind of convince the guy, like, let's just get this out of the way now if the time is right.
Yeah, and of course you mentioned that his cap hold. So basically, for those of you that don't know, certainly if you're looking for incredible deep dive into the minutia of CBA stuff, salary cap stuff, certainly would recommend a fine pod Locked On Bucks featuring Frank Madden and Eric Name. Frank knows all of this CBA stuff and salary cap stuff inside and out. So we're going to do a little more cursory level stuff here, but hopefully it still aids to the understanding of what you're looking for. And of course, go on brewhoop.com as well. Mitchell Maurer has good pieces on this that he wrote about, and this certainly will shift a bit of the dynamic from what he wrote about just a couple weeks ago. But Eric Bledsoe's cap hold, so basically what would have counted against the Bucks books, like the Bucks, because Eric Bledsoe would be entering free agency, they don't just get all of his contracts off the books. Like by keeping his cap hold on the team, that would retains the fact that the Bucks have bird rights to him, which means that the Bucks would be able to go over the salary cap to retain him on their team. Otherwise, for other free agents, they'd have to use cap space, which they have basically none of because of the many cap holds that they have at this point. So Eric Bledsoe's cap hold would have been $22.5 million after this season. If you look at what his contract will probably be, given the estimated raises it should be around $15.6 million this next year, which is just a little bit above his salary he's making this year, $15 million. So at least in the immediate future, you hope that you would be able to get a little bit more flexibility this summer. And of course, that's all the more important with the people that the Bucks are trying to retain as well. Riley, the thing that really stood out to me that I think was most interesting, and Kyle touched on this about hoping it goes to the playoffs, but we talked just a few weeks ago about how this front office might try and think about this team and think about who they're going to prioritize and retain. And we kind of thought that they would be thinking the playoffs would matter a lot more in terms of deciding who they're going to get. And I'm sure that will for all the other players. But I think Eric Bledsoe was probably the biggest question mark for all of us in terms of if his play would translate over to the playoffs. But clearly the Bucks have decided that what they've seen from this regular season was enough. They got him at a decent number, and they just decided that now is the time to pull the trigger.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of wisdom to that. I think it's difficult to erase the memory of last season's playoffs just because it was such a sore thumb experience for Bledsoe, and his failings could be chalked up as being a critical reason why the team wasn't able to get out of the first round, even against a shorthanded Celtics team. But you can kind of combine his struggles last year with, that was his first season. He joined early in the season, but he was still, he didn't have a preseason to kind of mesh with everybody else. The coaching changes, the chaos going on with that. And then as we've seen in pieces, just, different reporters talking about it, and it's just kind of the general feel you get from him in his interviews and everything after games. The fact that he seems to have bought so much into how Bud wants to use him and the relationship that those two have, and kind of the way that he's able to dictate a little bit defensively, like what is going to be the approach here. Bud entrusts Bledsoe to kind of lead the way the defense goes. And then Bledsoe's still able to get his points and utilize his style of play offensively. And yet it isn't so much where every single possession has to go through him. And so you're able to balance his production, still have Giannis get everything he needs. You kind of have those two kind of do a little bit of buddy ball every once in a while, which is nice. And I think like you said, over the off season and then throughout the regular season, I think Bud and the coaching staff and probably management as well has gotten a good enough feel that the way that Bledsoe is playing now is up to their standards and probably going to be sustainable, barring, if there's injury or anything like that, but sustainable for at least the next couple of seasons. And so that puts a lot of priority of just getting it done right now. And I think that's just a good sign of what we should expect, hopefully for the playoffs and then beyond that as well.
Yeah, and I think the other point to mention with the playoffs, and certainly Eric Bledsoe had a terrible experience last year, but it was also like the first time he had been in the playoffs in a significant time, in a significant role, essentially in his career. So I can't blame the guy for getting a little starstruck, but it certainly stuck with him over the whole summer. That was basically the lingering storyline that left its stink on him all summer long. Kyle, you talked about the number looking pretty good to you. What do you think about the fact that this is 4 years? That seemed to be a little bit of the quibbles that people had, is that this may not be the best on the back end of this contract, which you're typically going to expect when you sign a guy to probably his second contract and it takes him into his early 30s. What do you think about the 4 years that they got him on?
Yeah, I guess I don't know if the contract is also going to be declining as it goes throughout the year. So if they're going to front load it, this year and going into the 2021 season, if it's more front loaded in terms of salary wise, then it's better off if it's 4 years, because then at least, kind of like John Henson's, where it kind of declined in the amount as the years went on. But it's going to be something that I guess I didn't have an issue with 4 years because, I don't know how the cap's going to be, a couple of years from now. But if it continues to increase, then it's not going to be as much of an issue. Plus, I think when you get to, that final year or two, and like I said, if that fourth year is non-guaranteed, then that's even better. But, I think it is a concern with 4 years, but, I don't think you were ever going to get him at a, 2-year deal. You might have gotten away with 3, but it would have probably been more money. So I think 4 years is fine. I get the concerns, especially with, his durability and, defensively, he uses physicality so much and his physical abilities that will that start to wane as he gets older. And that's going to be something that happens with every older player. So I think the 4 years is fine, but I can understand why people are concerned. But I guess it depends on the contract numbers also.
Well, I think this is a lot kind of like a microcosm of the position the team is in general, where you have all these guys who are producing at such a high level, and how are you going to possibly replace them given the cap restraints that you're going to be dealing with in the offseason? And yes, like you said, Kyle, there are concerns about how does he age, but even, in his late 30s, he is an athletic player, but it's not like athleticism where it's necessarily like above the rim or anything like that. A lot of his strength, and then there is a bit of agility still that he has to rely on defense, but I think it would be reasonable to expect him, as long as, he continues to be in shape and everything like that, which we haven't seen anything to suggest otherwise, that he'd be able to maintain at this high of a level, or at least, a shade beneath that for the next 2 seasons, which, if, like we were saying, it kind of depends. If that fourth year isn't fully guaranteed, then maybe you get a little bit of flexibility where a couple of years down the line, maybe he's not producing at the same level and you're able to find a way to kind of package him, just depending on the way the league looks at that point. But I think 4 years, yes, the top line value is it generates a little bit of hesitancy, but overall, I don't think it's the end of the world given the way he's played and the way you could probably expect over the short term.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to point out for the people who aren't as big of fans of this, they would probably point to, well, who else could the Bucks get? And we've talked about this. It's the Bucks really, they'd have to renounce their cap holds on a lot of their players, which would mean that they wouldn't retain their bird rights. They wouldn't be able to go over the cap, which is basically unlikely for all the big name guys that they wanted to keep going up to this summer. So, but let's do the crazy theoretical where the Bucks, that wouldn't even happen. But if you just look at the other guys that are going to be out on the market potentially this year, so if I'm just looking at the list of free agent point guards this next summer, Kyrie Irving, if you don't,
you need a max space for that, and we've already gone over that, so not happening.
I also don't need his vibe in Milwaukee at all. I think the article about Eric Bledsoe, and it seemed like he really cared about being in a place like Milwaukee where he can just hang out with his family and care about basketball and not have to worry about distractions, probably was one of the reasons that he wanted to sign this contract. Kemba Walker is another guy. He's of course been, some people would have liked it if the Bucks maybe would have found a way to get Kemba Walker. You know, he does offer the kind of shooting that Eric Bledsoe doesn't have, but again, like the cap limitations make it so hard to even get these guys. There's D'Angelo Russell, and there's Eric Bledsoe, and then there's Derrick Rose, Goran Dragic. I mean, you know, Brogdon's on that list. Ricky Rubio, Terry Rozier, Derek Collison, Isaiah Thomas,
Jabari
Rajon
Parker.
Rondo.
What? Who said that?
Wait. Oh my God! I get out of here. I mean, you look at the list of guys, and I think the main point I wanted to make here is that I think the one out of all of the guys, I think it's interesting that they prioritized Eric Bledsoe, but I like it quite a bit because when you think about, I don't know, you think about guys on the free agent market, and you know, Eric Bledsoe is supposedly good friends with LeBron, shares an agent with LeBron. If the Lakers somehow strike out in free agency this summer, I think there's probably a world in which LeBron basically goes, all right, look, we need to get someone in here. Eric Bledsoe is my guy. He shares an agent with me. Let's just offer this guy a big amount of money. So I think that the bidding could have been driven up for Eric Bledsoe in this offseason. And so I think just for those connections alone, I think it kind of made sense to just kind of get his settled and out of the way and focus on negotiations for these other guys come the summer.
Yeah, I think he's unique as like the only guy that this is really, or was a really clear option. Like we were saying earlier, it wasn't really on the radar that an extension was, you know, nigh. But of all the potential free agents, I think he was the one most likely, just because at this point, I think the Bucks are capped out at whatever the maximum offer of an extension they could have given to Brogdon. So we can assume that Brogdon forewent that, and we'll see how he goes in the open market. And then Chris obviously is, you know, his own kind of arms with the way that he's kind of looking at probably a max contract. So I agree that it was in the best interest of the Bucks to do this, and I doubt that, you know, there was many other options for other guys that they can nail down. So at least they got this here now. You get rid of the chaos, and when you go into the open market, you can say, okay, at least we have our starting point guard nailed down. We don't have to worry about that, which in a ever more guard heavy league, having a reliable option there is, you know, ever more important. So.
Yeah, and I think this makes, you know, the Bucks. It was interesting. I remember the summer where all that cap room opened up, and the Bucks just kind of started spending it all, like the Plumlee contract, the Mirotic contract, all these guys that wound up not being great contracts. But at the time, for me, it made sense. Like they all seemed like guys that were going to fit around Giannis. It seemed like they were going all in and trying to see if this would work. But I was fascinated by the fact that they seemed ready to kind of just get their business done and settled out of the way that summer, as opposed to try and move on and see if they could do some stuff the next year. And this feels like another sort of preemptive move on the Bucks' part to take at least one chess piece and take it out of the fact that they have to deal with it. You know, having a point guard figured out in this league, I think is important. And even if there's a huge amount of point guards that people can get, I mean, when you look at who the Bucks have had at point guard for the past, 2 decades, there's no contest that Bledsoe is certainly their best point guard since Sam Cassell, right?
Sir, how dare you respect rookie year Brandon Jennings
Okay.
or whatever? What was that, Game 6 Brandon Jennings?
Yeah.
You can't doubt that. Come on.
I don't know. I think I think there's something to be said for that too. Just the fact that he has had so much importance to this team. It seems like, especially defensively. I mean, you only had to look at the Jazz game, and you see Pat Connaughton trying to chase around Donovan Mitchell. I mean, you know, a game like that can switch on a dime, and Eric Bledsoe out there, you know, as a matter of fact, I'm sure if he ever gets a chance to face off against Donovan Mitchell again, he's going to let him know that, yeah, there's a reason he went off for 46 when he was on the bench. And I just think that's a really interesting ideology and philosophy that Bledsoe has, that Bud seems to have unlocked in him. And I think it's certainly worthwhile to keep around.
Well, I think what you're saying, the fact that he's a two-way guard as well, like he's so dominant on both ends, or has moments where he can be so dominant on both ends, that has a value all its own. Like, yeah, it's one thing where you maybe have a Kemba or a Kyrie who are offensive juggernauts, and then you make do, and maybe they can kind of lock in for defensive possessions here or there. But with the way the team is constructed now, everything revolves around Giannis offensively. So to be able to have a guy who, when Giannis is off or he's off the court or somebody else is off, whatever the deal is, he can kind of help pick up the slack. He doesn't need to be the top guy, but when it's called upon, he can still kind of function. And then on the other end, where he can dictate the flow of things and he can kind of break things up at the point of attack and fits really well in the way that Bud has kind of schemed up the team. I'm not sure how it's difficult to gauge the value of one guy who's on one team if he was put in different environments, like how adaptable is he? But the fact that he fits so perfectly with the way things are going now, and he's shown the ability to change the way he approaches things, or he's bought into change in a way that would suggest that in the future, if Bud determines that a new strategy is needed, or he kind of adjusts as the rest of the league adjusts to the way the Bucks are playing, I think all of that alone drives up the value to Milwaukee so much more than it might be to other teams, even if other teams would get in a bidding war, just because obviously Bledsoe is a good player. But there's so much importance in getting this kind of deal done before the offseason even arrives.
And speaking of the offseason, Kyle, the thing that interests me the most about this is the Malcolm Brogdon negotiations are going to be fascinating, because I honestly feel like I'm having a really hard time pegging what his value might be to other teams versus the Bucks. How do you think this might affect the Bucks going into this summer negotiating with Brogdon, the fact that they have at least half of the backcourt already sewed up?
I think it's going to be a little bit more in the Bucks' favor, because it'd be one thing if they let, Bledsoe go, because there's not really that many good alternatives at the point guard position. But in the shooting guard position, it's kind of a different story. I mean, granted, you're not going to get, Klay Thompson or Jimmy Butler, but you can maybe try and see about like a JJ Redick or Danny Green, or hell, even a Terrence Ross, guys like that, where they can kind of come in, kind of be a microwave type of guy. So I think for the Bucks, it's going to give them more of kind of like the edge going into it. And I think it might be able to be something that they can say, like, look, you're also a restricted free agent, so we can just see what you get. And if someone wants to offer you, 15 plus million to be in like a 4 or 5 year deal, then okay, so be it. We'll have to just cut our losses. But it's kind of tough because Brogdon also is the guy that seems to hit the clutch three. He is the guy that, when the Bucks badly need a basket, he's able to get it. And, it's one of those things where he's a great PR guy, and I think the Bucks would want to keep him, but I think they're also going to be in the position of, unlike Bledsoe, we can find different alternatives to fill into your role. Maybe it won't be to the same value, but it's still, in terms of skill and ability, it is kind of something that you can find in the open market.
Yeah, Riley, and I think that the interesting thing about Brogdon is he's also able to run the point, and he does a lot of those things that Bud likes. He can dribble, he can shoot, he can pass, he can do all of those basically standard basketball things that get him in Bud's pet house. But like Kyle was saying, I mean, those other shooting guards probably don't offer it quite to that level, but I think Bud also has like an incredible belief in him and his staff's ability to turn people into certainly maybe not players of Brogdon's level, but at least can be kind of Brogdon light. And I'm sure they have those sort of aspirations for guys like Dante DiVincenzo and Sterling Brown. Even he's shown a little bit of an ability, but do you think that, like Kyle was saying, the Brogdon and sort of the role that he's filling right now might be a little more replaceable than the ones that we were thinking of for Bledsoe?
Yeah, I would think so. And like you said, I was going to bring up, if you didn't, the fact that there have been so many guys that have kind of moved in and out in terms of the substitute rotation to back up Brogdon, and the fact that they all kind of play similar roles. I think that speaks to the fact that even if it isn't so much that they think they can maximize, and maybe they do think and they are able to maximize guys, but they're able to kind of simplify that position, and it doesn't matter like which guy it is, as long as they kind of fulfill certain criteria, baseline criteria. They're able to go out there and give enough that it's not the end of the world if Brogdon isn't playing, or whoever it happens to be. So I would agree that maybe he's a little bit more replaceable. I think that's an interesting question that kind of each fan has to come to an answer to, and how important they think Brogdon is. And I think just talking about his potential next contract situation, I would agree with Kyle that this probably puts the Bucks, or puts it a little bit more in the Bucks' favor, just because if we look back on the 2016 offseason, which is the last time that there was like a really big spike in cap values, there was this gigantic wave of like really awful contracts, which we all know about, and the Bucks definitely partook in that to a certain extent. But then as time went on, and I haven't looked back at like the free agent list in a long time and what guys signed for and at what time, but I think because of the way that restricted free agency works, there's going to be more downward pressure on whatever Brogdon's next contract offer from another team might be, just because if somebody else offers him a contract, then they get tied up for a while they give time for the Bucks to be able to match that offer, and everybody else. And I have no idea what Brogdon's value around the league or on the open market will be, but I think a lot of other teams will be probably pursuing more flexible options that they have more of a guarantee of nailing down, even at higher values, just because messing with somebody of Brogdon's importance where you're not able to tell, like, is he really that important where Milwaukee definitely match or maybe not? I think that'll definitely push down. And obviously he's still going to get paid. I mean, no doubt about that. He's going to make a lot more money than he's making right now. But I think overall this signing and then just the general ability to kind of swap in different players, especially on the substitute role, kind of pushes it in a direction where it might end up pushing down Brogdon's value, or at least his next contract dollar value.
Yeah, right. And I think
go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, and I think it also kind of shifts the priority because now, you still want to have Middleton. That's still going to be their first choice, but it kind of moves. I think it makes trying to find a way to make Brook Lopez work, because if they can find a deal for him that matches, then they can kind of see, okay, how much leftover do we have for Brogdon and how can we make this work? So I think that's going to be something that will be different. Also, it's just the fact that they can maybe just turn around and say, okay, we got to get Middleton. How much can we give Brook? And then depending on those two things, how much do we have left over for Brogdon? Well, I think going into the summer would have been, we have to get Middleton. I don't know what we're going to do with Bledsoe. I don't know what we're going to do with Brogdon, and how much money can we give to Brook?
Yeah, and I think this is just so, I just think it's so fascinating that Bledsoe wanted to get this figured out. And Brogdon, I mean, this is really going to be the only big payday he'll probably likely have in his whole career. So I can't blame the guy if he's trying to look to get paid and set up his whole family, given his advanced quote unquote advanced age in the league. I believe he's around 26. But this is such an interesting tone setter if Eric Bledsoe does this, and I would say probably perception around the league is, I would guess, that this is a little bit of a hometown discount. So I'm curious if these other guys are gonna follow suit at all. I mean, like this is basically what Giannis did when he signed his smaller contract, was to allow the Bucks to have a little more room to do these kind of things. Are the other guys going to follow suit as well? I mean, there was that quote from Mark Lasry, I think, in that Zach Lowe piece about Chris Middleton about, like, does he love Milwaukee? Yeah, enough to give us a discount. Yeah, I don't know. Which was like really, like, it was like really
rousing endorsement.
Right. It was like such a strange way to close out that article, one, and two, made me think a little bit more about, I don't know. I guess I didn't picture, I picture Chris Middleton, maybe just because of his quiet demeanor, as maybe being the kind of guy who would do that. But I mean, I don't really know anything about him. And I would have not guessed that Eric Bledsoe would want to do this, just based on all of the stuff that's swirled out around him for his whole career, So I think that's going to be just like a fascinating thing to watch as we head into the off season here, to see how those guys jockey for their money, or maybe talk together to try and work it out and run this thing back.
Well, it's not like, I mean, I think it was common sense where, Middleton already took one pay cut. So to expect him to take a second one would have been very naive for everyone involved. So I guess I didn't see anything really weird about that quote. I think it was just like, well, yeah, Middleton's not going to take a hometown discount or a pay cut to stay with the team, obviously, but he wants to stay in Milwaukee, but he's not going to, take a significant pay cut to what his value is to do it. And I was like, okay, yep, sounds about right. So I think it was just one of those where it probably didn't need to be added in the article, but it was just something that I didn't really think twice on.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, I was just going to say, like, the idea that Chris took a pay cut, like, yeah, a slight one, but I think he got a sort of market value. I think the main issue when talking about Chris and what his next contract will be, and we've kind of heard about this a little bit with, like, Jimmy Butler pushing really hard for, like, he needs this max contract. Because, and I think Kemba is kind of a similar position, because a lot of these guys signed contracts right before the big boom of 2016. And so the contracts that they were on were kind of like market value just a few months right before the giant explosion, and everybody got handed out gigantic contracts for, a lot lesser players than they are. And so I think it's reasonable to expect that, Chris has been quote unquote laboring at a level beneath what he should probably be, or commensurate with his pay level. And so I think it's understandable that he's coming upon this free agency, and maybe he's looking back like, oh, I took this discount, but I think it was a fair value at the time. And now he has this priority of, I missed out on that last big boom, but now here comes the next one. Timing, I can make up for all that. So I'm real skeptical that Chris will take maybe like a slight haircut on the top value, but I would be shocked if it was like any sort of gigantic cut. Like, not that Bledsoe got a gigantic cut, but as team friendly as it ended up being for Bledsoe.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, pertinent to the ownership, of course, and looking at the Bucks, the number that you really want to be looking at is the space that they have below the luxury tax. Primarily, we can talk a lot about if the ownership is going to finally be willing to pay the tax now that they have a championship contender. They seem to have said that in the past, but we know how that goes with owners. I mean, just look at what happened in Houston this year. As they were just shedding contracts left and right to try to get under the tax. But the more interesting thing about whether the Bucks go into the tax or not is some of the tools and mechanisms that they'll have available to try and get Brook back on a team-friendly deal, especially since they don't have his bird rights. So basically the strongest mechanism that they would have to be able to bring it back is the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is around $9 million for this season, might be a little bit more for next season. But if you say, well, the ownership should just pay the tax, like they're going to get more money from the playoff run, like that's going to help offset some of those costs. We basically gave you half the public funding. You didn't even have to cover half of it because Herb Kohl split, foot, $100 million worth of the bill as well. Like you can certainly afford to pay the tax. Well, if the Bucks do go into the tax, it sort of restricts some of the options that are available to them that they could be able to offer Brook. So basically, if you go into the taxpayer mid-level exception is only $5.3 million. So think about like what the Warriors did with DeMarcus Cousins this year. So since they pay so much money, they're in the tax. And they still have the mid-level exception, but it's at a significantly smaller number. Would Brook Lopez want to come back for $5.3 million? I don't know. It doesn't really seem like it based on the value that he would have to tons of other teams. Will $9 million be enough if you stay under the tax? I also think that's questionable, and maybe if the Bucks do go up to that number, they'd have to give him longer years or something like that. So I think when we're thinking about all these contracts too that are going up, Brook really is like the hardest wrench to try and figure out, given the fact that the Bucks just have a few less tools in their arsenal to try and bring him back since they don't have his bird rights. So that's just some more food for thought. Anything else you guys want to talk about in relation to maybe some of these other guys, upcoming free agency and this Eric Bledsoe contract?
I'd say the main thing that's jumping out to me heading into it is, and we've talked about throughout the season and last off season as well, as how high my confidence is in Jon Horst getting the job done, and whether it's Horst and Bud or whoever the combination is. I mean, it seems like over the past calendar year, every single move has turned out to be awesome. Essentially, like even the DJ Wilson pick, which was universally panned by everybody, rightly so, for the first year. I mean, that turned around for like a 2, 3, 4 month period here during this season. So I think I'm going to, for now, place trust in Horst and company to be able to kind of nail the steps correctly. And, it's tough to bat 1,000 with all the different moving parts, but I'm glad that he and his team are in place to kind of help manage the transition into the next era, whatever it happens to be, rather than, X number of other teams who happen to have whatever their front office is.
Yeah, I guess I don't really have much. It's just nice to see Bledsoe get the contract, and then immediately after his performance against the Lakers, it was just like, it just makes you feel better about the contract and everything that happened after that. And, I think it also, like I said, it's one less thing that we have to stress out about. It's one less thing that we have to worry about. And I agree with Riley. Horst has managed this year and even last year to like make pretty good moves. So like, I think Horst has done a fantastic job so far.
Yeah. Big ups to our guy, Johnny Horst, in the front office, doing absolutely fine work. And I'm happy for Bledsoe too. I felt like I was kind of strong defender of him this summer after his really woeful playoff performance. I just think he showed too much good stuff in the regular season for it to not be worthwhile. So good on him for getting paid finally. And of course, another guy who's just got out of a contract with the San Antonio Spurs and is flying his way right to Milwaukee is Pau Gasol, who let's first, before we break down what he might add to the Bucks, let's pour one out for Isaiah Cannon. Kyle, I know you thought he'd put some he importantly drew a charge and hit 2 threes, right? Is that what he'll have on his tombstone?
Yep. Hit 2 threes, took a charge, RIP, fire the cannon.
Fire the cannon. It's sort of darkly comic there.
A rallying cry to rival Bucks in 6, if I've ever heard one.
But of course, the more important thing is that Pau Gasol joining the Bucks this year, he's averaging a career low 12.2 minutes, 4.2 points, 4.7 rebounds, 1.9 assists. He'd only appeared on, I believe, 27 games for the Spurs. He had some issues with his foot this year. Riley, what are your realistic expectations for Pau in terms of his role on this team?
Not much, which is fine. I mean, he's a buyout guy. I don't expect him to get a lot of burn throughout the regular season or the playoffs, unless it's in weird situations where maybe if Brook gets injured. I think we can look at this both as a combination of the quote unquote championship experience, which, I don't know whether people value that or otherwise. It's kind of to each their own, but also just having another big, and in this case, a veteran big who has a lot of experience and I guess, I'm going to fall right back on it. A lot of experience in the postseason and kind of familiarity with the way that the defense is played, just because the drop system, which Bud uses, is reminiscent of the way that Pop ends up, kind of playing defense in San Antonio, and it worked for a long, long time. So I think it's a good buyout guy, if only because he uniquely comes into a situation where he doesn't need a lot of time to kind of hit the ground running and get meshed within the way the team plays. Whereas I always get concerned, whether it be trade guys or other guys you pick up kind of off the scrap heap, how much, maybe they'll have an impact, but how much are they able to kind of familiarize themselves with the system with only 20 games for the playoffs? So I don't expect him to play a lot, but if he does, he should theoretically fit pretty well defensively. And then God only knows what he's able to do on offense these days. So I got nothing there.
Kyle, here's something that I thought was, I feel like usually with these buyout guys, you see a guy on a team, and the Spurs are at sort of this lower end of the totem pole in the Western Conference, but they're still in the playoff race. It's usually these guys on teams that aren't really near the playoff race at all, getting jettisoned and then going to another team. That was weird that he got a buyout from the Spurs and wanted to come to the Bucks. I think in the Woj story, it's presumably for a slightly larger role. I just don't really know if is there really a much bigger role at all in Milwaukee compared to what he's doing in San Antonio?
Yeah, that was the weird thing to me, because like I said, I only see him as in case Lopez gets hurt kind of thing, or maybe just needs a break from banging with a Drummond or Embiid type of guy. Just because, it was Bud has pretty much decided in terms of his backup 5, he's going to go with a Ersan Mirotic type of lineup, or Ersan Giannis. He's kind of going with 2 power forwards instead of, a backup traditional center. And I don't know what this larger role really is, but at the same time, I'm not Bud. But yeah, it's kind of weird. But I think Gasol can still, he's still a decent player. He's still an NBA caliber player that can, come in and provide some kind of skill in a short stint. Maybe I wouldn't want to be in the focal point of the team or being the team's, top player, but he is someone that, he can come off the bench. He can, put in a good 10 minutes and I would feel confident about, and I wouldn't have any hesitation or reservations about it.
I think by larger role, he meant he's going to add another championship ring to his resume, thus ensuring a Hall of Fame career gets even that much brighter.
Riley, in terms of the outrage level, how upset do the Christian Woodlands have to be when Pau Gasol gets minutes over him versus the Jason Smith people? A little bit less, right?
I mean, I don't know. Can you really be super outraged? I mean, the only time that Wood got significant burn was last night against the Jazz, and that was because we had a sandwich on the bench in terms of options. So I'm not sure if you should be all that outraged, because we're going to be returning to form as we've expected it, or as we've come to known it this season. So I'm not super outraged. I consider myself an okay Wood fan, but hopefully you hold on and he improves over the offseason, and next year he gets a better role. That's what I would tell to the Woodlands people.
All right. Well, that's the wrong answer. We should be mad. We wasn't expecting such an even-tempered response, but I appreciate that from you. Anything else you guys have on Paul? Because he's going to have such a minute role on this team. I don't think he warrants that much conversation until we see his face on the bench. And
there are worse guys they could have bought on the buyout market. So, I mean, Paul's not the best that they could have gotten, but he certainly isn't the worst.
I think two things. One, it was a missed marketing opportunity not to get Marcin Gortat right before Fat Tuesday for all of the content of him driving to Polish bakeries throughout Milwaukee and speaking with the bakers there. And two, okay, I forgot my second point.
All right. Well, that seems like a fitting way to end it.
The Gasol era begins on that note.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe he'll, if we face Toronto in a series, maybe he'll do some weird thing to. I don't know if he has any sort of good-natured ribbing with Marc Gasol the way that the Lopez brothers certainly do. I feel like any feud that they have would just be really boring, and they'd probably just do it in Spanish, so we probably wouldn't even understand it.
Isn't Pau Gasol known as like a polymath? Like he knows 6 languages. He's really into opera and like classical music. I believe he plays the piano, like all these sorts of things. I think he's a very, very cultured individual. So I'm not sure if Mark followed in his older brother's footsteps in that regard.
Interesting. So he's a polymath.
A polymath, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, a Pauli. Okay. I trampled all over it. I'm sorry.
That's all right. But thanks for correcting my pronunciation. All right. Well, we're going to take a break here, do a mid-roll ad. Just forgot to introduce it last week, but I'm doing it this week. So stay tuned for whatever you're about to hear. All right, guys, I got to take a piss break really quick. I will be right back. Coffee is fucking flowing through me. I'll be right back.
Is this going to be on the podcast? Is this part of the
try and stop Gio from licking his crotch? So that could also be a quick trying to stop it.
I don't think he's even here. I think he just ran off.
Yeah, that'll happen. Gio, stop licking your crotch.
Did he get neutered? Is he has to have to leave it alone for a while, or what? Or is it just annoying?
It was fine initially, but now he seems to have like some kind of scab or something.
Okay.
So I don't know. Like, it clearly is bothering him, but it might have been the diapers that we had put on him.
Yeah, that'll do it too. It irritated a little bit. Yeah. I mean, it was so annoying with Ali just because his hair was so long and it was obviously fucking snowy as shit outside all the time. So every time we went out, he'd get covered in snow. So we had to come back in and like gently brush him off with the towel. And then he's biting the shit out of the towel the entire time. So it's really annoying for the first couple weeks. I feel you there.
Otherwise, I mean, yeah. And that just started today. So hopefully, I mean, it's been warmer. It's temporary. Yeah. We're just going to, I emailed the vet just like, hey, not sure if there's like some kind of ointment that we should get him or what we should do about the diapers. Because we only use the diapers like overnight just in case.
Yeah, I know you said he had some separation anxiety. Has that improved at all a little bit? Do you guys let him be in the crate now? Yeah, I know.
All right.
I mean, it takes like 5 minutes, but
yeah.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Also glad I did that.
That's got to be out of the pod.
Yeah, all this will be for the Patreon, the behind the scenes full cut.
I walked out and I went to the bathroom and first thing my fiance says is, "Hey, do you mind getting the broccoli I put in the oven?" Just completely forgot about it.
It's like on fire.
Yeah, it's extra crispy. All right. I'll bring us back in 3, 2, 1. All right, we're back, and guys, I think the last two things let's touch on. Let's look back at the week that was for the Bucks, and then look at the week ahead, of course. So, as you know, we predicted what the Bucks would go last week. I think both of you guys said 3-1 in these 4 games. I said 4-0, and I was wrong. I feel like Kyle's been right literally every time we've done these predictions.
Excuse me, I believe I correctly guessed that the Utah game would be the loss.
Yeah, that's fair.
Can I get my credit, please?
Was going to be the loss, so.
All right, good work, Riley.
Yay!
You're doing really well. I think I've been wrong a lot. So okay, so they win 117 to 106 over the Bulls. Woohoo! No Giannis in that game. Then they win at Sacramento 141 to 140 in OT against the Lakers 131 to 120. Bledsoe goes off for 31, 9, and 5 after his big payday. And then, of course, they lose at Utah 115 to 111. No Bledsoe or Brogdon in that game, so they went with the big boy lineup. Kyle, let's take a look at the week that was. What's one big takeaway or observation you had from any of these games?
It was kind of like an interesting trend, I feel like, where, the Bucks for the first half of the game either were just struggling to get like some momentum, or, we're used to them like in the second quarter just coming out on fire, and just that's when they would gain the distance from the teams. And in these three games, I didn't watch the Utah one, so I wouldn't know about that one. But it for sure in the Chicago and Lakers game, they took forever to actually get going, and it wasn't until like that second half where they finally, kind of kicked into high gear. And then the Sacramento one, it was kind of like a weird game of runs where, the Kings were kind of just hitting shots. Harry Giles was seemingly able to hit everything known to man, and De'Aaron Fox, like they were just like kind of a scrappier group. But I think the two things were the second half, the Bucks seemed to turn it around, and someone in each of those games, and primarily Eric Bledsoe in the Lakers and Kings game, like he was the one that was like, okay, I'm going to win this game on my own, and I really don't care. And it's kind of good to see about that. In the Chicago one, it was kind of a combination of Brogdon and, Mirotic had his streak. And I guess I should also give Brogdon a shout because he did hit that big three in the Sacramento game also. So definitely a slower first start, but second half kind of flipping a switch type of thing. And like I said, I didn't watch the Utah game. From what I read, it seemed like, the Bucks were struggling. They finally regained their footing, had a giant lead, and then it kind of, I think, tired legs and lack of guard depth kind of hurt them in the end.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about you were talking about the Bucks maybe coming alive in the second half. That Lakers game, the whole way, it just felt like, even though the Lakers were leading for a lot of it, just felt like the Bucks were going to win in the end, which is a fantastic feeling. That's very new this year for this Bucks team. Riley, what's a big takeaway or observation you may have had from this past week?
The depth on this team is crazy. I mean, whether it be not having Giannis for the Chicago game and the way Chicago plays, I mean, it's like all their starters, and if nobody else is able to score, that's fine, just fine by them. They're going to ride those top five, and you still get by without Giannis. And then to be able to go on the road and beat beat the Sacramento and beat Los Angeles, kind of Sacramento at their own game a little bit, and then Los Angeles, I mean, obviously prime time against LeBron, that's its own kind of thing. But then after that, road game, back to back, you're missing like damn near every, 2/5 of the starters with Brogdon and Bledsoe out. You run out there with like everybody's going to be 6'9" and above, and you like put a 20-2 run right on the Jazz or whatever it ended up being. It was super crazy to watch right at the start, because you go in assuming this really unconventional big lineup is going to get dominated, and yet they come out and just put the work on the Jazz. So to be able to come through the trip 3-1, and that final game being the second game in a back-to-back on the road in Utah against all of them, I mean, the Bulls are awful, obviously, but the other games against pretty great teams, or, interesting teams in their own right at their own,
playoff contending teams.
Yes, yeah, I mean, exactly. And all in the West as well. The fact that they're able to get through that, and even last night be as close as they are, and if you go back and look at the minute load for each of the starters, it's still like within the mid to low 30s for everybody, which is super crazy. And I would never have guessed, had you told me that we were going to have these sorts of injury issues, whether it be Hill and Sterling or Bledsoe and Brogdon, or whoever it is that had to be out for rest or due to injury, to still come out with that good of a record and to look that impressive night after night is, it's indicative of how awesome this season has gone. And I'm looking forward to how it goes from here on out, now that we're going to be returning back from the road and coming back to Milwaukee for a little bit.
Yeah, but the weird thing that stood that the Jazz game was bizarre, one, because obviously they were missing their guards. And so the jumbo lineup, which started the game, was basically Antetokounmpo, Middleton, Mirotic, Lopez, and Ilyasova. But weirdly, as is fitting with this Bucks team, the fact that they were missing their guards like probably contributed more to the fact that they got outscored in the paint 50-42. Because like all of those big guys are like, it's actually better like when Brogdon and Bledsoe are in. I think their chances to score more in the paint is probably higher. So that just points to the fact that this Bucks team is such a bizarre constructed team that still works really, really well together. And the thing that was frustrating about that Jazz game, and I think the fact that the Bucks had it within fours. I mean, Riley, you gave all the caveats, but it's really impressive. But if you just look at like where the Bucks were shooting from, they kind of got out of what their typical shooting diet was. So, I'm just not clean based on cleaning the glass. So they take 29% of their shots at the rim. But for the whole season, the Bucks usually take 41.5% of shots at the rim. That's second in the league. Mid-range, 34% of shots from the mid-range. On the season, Bucks usually do 20.2% of shots from the mid-range. And then you look at three-pointers, 37%, which is pretty typical. But then what you do is you go down to the accuracy, and Bucks only shoot 54.2% at the rim, whereas on the season, they're usually converting 67.4%. So I think you definitely felt the absence of Bledsoe and Brogdon, their ability to finish, and it contributed a lot to this team turning it probably a little bit more into a jump shooting team than they would have liked, which was just like a really weird facet of last night's game. And the Jazz also shot 65.2% at the rim. The Bucks season average is 56.7%, whereas the 65.2% would be 25th worst, like the 25th ranked in the league, all per cleaning the glass. So Bucks just, the type of formula that they've usually been winning with just wasn't necessarily there last night. And they still only lost by 4 to the Jazz on the road, with Donovan Mitchell going off for a very, very impressive amount. And I talked about those rim stats. I just looked at, these defensive field goal things are always so hard, but I just looked briefly at the NBA.com like player tracking tools, and here's what players shot against Nikola Mirotic at the rim, 4 for 4. Here's what they shot against Ersan Ilyasova at the rim, weirdly 5 for 5. Brook Lopez went 1 for 8. The Jazz were against him. So I'm not sure if anyone else noticed that, but certainly seemed like Ersan had a tough night at the office defensively at the rim. You noticed that too, Riley?
Yeah, I think that's one way to put it. I think Gobert dunked on Ersan, and I'm pretty sure I saw Ersan deform into a pile of dust. So I don't know if he's going to be available tonight against the Suns, but he's it's last night was a little bit strange just because you're shorthanded, but definitely if we can kind of tone back a little bit on the Ersan minutes, especially in certain lineups where he's getting eaten alive on defense, I think that might be a good suggestion for Bud to kind of keep in mind.
The same thing happened on Friday, like against the Lakers. He was getting torched by LeBron, getting torched by Ingram. Like he was also getting, lit up on Friday. So it wasn't just like Saturday. And when I tweeted like, it was frustrating to see Ersan get this much run while Wilson sitting on the bench. And I was like, well, Wilson was bad. It's like, okay, but Wilson was bad for, 2 minutes, which isn't really fair because it could have just been a bad timing while Ersan's been bad, like especially with the lineups with Mirotic, like on NBAstats.com, him and Mirotic in the 2-man lineup, they have a defensive rating of 109.7, which is the worst of any player that's currently on the roster. Like the next closest is Pat Connaughton, and that's at 103.1. And like, yeah, the offense is good. Like the offensive rating was like 137, and this is in 56 minutes. But like, still, when you're getting lit up defensively, it's not going to help anything else.
This is very much indicative of the fact that both Mirotic and Ilyasova, they're both like okay, like Mirotic more than Ersan in terms of individual defense, and they're probably more helpful in a team system than they are, one-on-one. So the fact that they've been paired together, so then you have 2 guys who can kind of be run at, especially against teams that can focus on them with, just run sets for that. It's not great. So hopefully maybe DJ, or we'll figure it out once we have a little bit more health, but definitely not a highlight that they're going to want to put on the old highlight reel.
Yeah, don't need to see too much of a Ersan guarding LeBron James on his defensive highlight reel. Also, when you mentioned him turning into a pile of dust, I pictured him as like a phoenix in Harry Potter, turning into a pile of dust, and Bud is like Dumbledore in this scenario, and so he's just like continues to be reborn over and over.
Yeah, with like scotch tape.
Yeah,
with like clear scotch tape.
Clear scotch tape. Oh,
cheers. One more point. Can I make one more point about the game, or just like the week that was?
Yes, yeah.
I would say, I mean, obviously Giannis and kind of matched bucket for bucket with Mitchell, but I think what was super encouraging and probably super par for the course and not super surprising, just given the way that Giannis has been, but given the fact that the Bucks were missing 2/5 of their starting units, and given the fact that Utah is a top 3 defense, and given the fact that Gobert is such a good, paint defender, the fact that Giannis just went after him possession after possession after possession and got every single shot he wanted was wild to watch, and should be a super encouraging sign that even against teams that have really good defenses this year, for whatever reason, Giannis is just on one and able to get right around it, no problem. So that's a really good sign for even if other guys aren't really on for the playoffs. I'm not too concerned about in years past. You're like, oh, are they going to, wall Giannis off and then everybody else is going to have to kill him? It won't matter if you try to put a human wall between it. He's going to get around it regardless. So I thought that was really cool to watch and probably something to keep in the back of your mind as we go forward.
Yeah. Also, the fact that that last Jazz game when they matched Gobert against him, that kind of seemed to be the first time a team would do that, match a center against Giannis. And some people were like, "Oh, well, maybe this is the strategy." The fact that the next game Giannis was like, no, Rudy Gobert's going to finish minus 36." I just don't know how these people talk about. What if he, if he's not able to make a jump shot? What happens when teams wall him off in the playoffs? It's like, I don't know, man. Brad Stevens might have had the best strategy so far last year, where he was like, look, we're just going to let Giannis score like 45, and he's going to be able to do whatever he wants. And that's, I just don't think there's a tried and true strategy to stop Giannis. And clearly he showed
you can't stop him. You can only contain him to the best of your ability.
Absolutely. All right, guys, let's look ahead. So, of course, when you're listening to this, it'll be Monday, March 4th. Bucks finish up their road trip at the Phoenix Suns. Then on they get a few days off, and on Thursday they'll be back home to face the Indiana Pacers. Saturday they head to Charlotte, they're in Milwaukee and they face Charlotte, and then they do another 3-game road trip kicking off on Sunday at the San Antonio Spurs. Kyle, prognosticator, what do you think the Bucks will go over that stretch?
Let's go 4-0.
I was gonna say 4-0. 4-0.
I was hesitant because I was like, okay, that Indiana game, it's going to be tough, but it's at Fiserv Forum, so I feel a little bit better. The Charlotte game, again, going to be tough, but that's also at Fiserv Forum. Feel good about it. And then the Spurs is the following day, so I don't know if there's going to be a load management with, maybe giving Giannis rest, or kind of like maybe giving Bledsoe or Brogdon, like another player getting some secondary rest. But I still feel confident, regardless of who plays and who doesn't play, that Milwaukee can handle these 4 teams. I mean, Phoenix isn't good, but they beat Milwaukee in Milwaukee through some crazy luck and beat the Lakers on Saturday night. So who knows? But I'm gonna go 4-0. I just feel good about it, and having the Indiana and Charlotte game at Fiserv Forum makes me feel better about it.
I will follow up all that optimism, and I'm gonna guess 2-2. Not that 4-0 is definitely for sure possible outcome, but I would say we've seen, just like even the Phoenix game earlier this year, like this team is still capable of every once in a while there being a weird fluke game. I don't anticipate it being the case. Like, they're definitely not going to lose 2 in a row to Phoenix and thus have their first 2 in a row losses of the season. So I'm not worried about that. But Indiana is obviously, they're fighting. If they can continue to hold the 3rd seed down, that's really interesting for the way the playoffs end up working out. Charlotte, I'm not as worried about. And then San Antonio, it's a lot more, kill or be killed out west. And while every win is super important, obviously, for the Bucks, holding home court, both in the East and then just for the playoffs in general, is important. I think they're probably probably a little more hungry, and the fact that it's going to be a back-to-back on the road that you're going to have to travel to, I'm not too confident. So I'm going to guess 2-2 probable losses against maybe Indiana and San Antonio.
Well, thank you, Riley, for going 2-2 and saying which games they might win or lose. So you can use that next week to explain why you're
get the credit. Get all the credit.
I'm going to go 3-1. I think they're going to slip up in that San Antonio game. I just think it's going to be tough to go on the road on a back-to-back. And I also think that Pop's team, out of almost any of them, is uniquely suited to, if they're hitting on the night, since they hunt out those mid-range shots, uniquely suited to potentially really take advantage of this Bucks defense. So we'll have to see how that one goes. But the good news for you is that Kyle, who is always right, guessed that they'd go 4-0. So thank you for predicting that, Kyle. And we will sign off now. Wish the Bucks luck this week. Make sure to review, rate us on iTunes, subscribe on whatever your favorite podcast app is. This is the Brew Hoop feed. And of course, you'll also find Brian's show dropping every Thursday, Bucks Film Room, breaking down the games. And stay tuned to brewhoop.com for all of your favorite Bucks articles and our takes there. So thank you again.